Hello and welcome to the Fifth Down Huddle. The regular season is right around the corner. Under a month now until the season opener, Thursday nights, the Chiefs against the Texans. What a season opener. I mean, it has playoff implications for one, but also I assume it's going to be a great matchup, a great game to watch. I'm happy it's not just going to be a shutout game. If it were like the Chiefs against the Raiders, I'd be like, maybe not as fun. Although there also are some good matchups in between those two teams, considering they are in the same division. But you get what I mean. I'm happy that it's two normal playoff teams that are going to go at it week one. It's just going to be a great game to watch that Thursday night, and I'm super excited for that. But yeah, what I'm not excited about is that there hasn't been a preseason to watch. This is kind of the first time in a while. This is really the first time there hasn't been a preseason, but this was the first time in a while in which I was actually excited for the preseason. Partly because over the course of me being an NFL fan, I've never paid 100% attention to the preseason. Sure, I've watched it, with some rookie quarterbacks. Like last year, I focused really hard on Daniel Jones. I think I watched every Giants preseason game. I watched all the Patriots preseason games just because I was interested in N'Keal Harry and their wide receiving core. And yeah, so normally it's just been those teams that have big stories in terms of who's actually going to play week one that I usually watch. But this year I was ready to watch as many preseason games as I could fit into those 4 weeks. It's hard to fit 16 games a week in, but considering COVID's happening, I don't have a lot going on besides work in the morning. I figured I'd have a lot of free time to really look into those preseason games and talk about them a lot, but here we are, no preseason games, and it has its downside, but overall it's for the safety of the players, can't complain. But yeah, so let's get into this episode, let's huddle up, and before we do, I'm going to ask that you check out the Instagram page at Fifth Down Huddle, and also that you check out the YouTube page if you're listening from Spotify, and if you're on YouTube, check out the Spotify page at Fifth Down Huddle. Everything's at Fifth Down Huddle. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, anything you can think of, Fifth Down Huddle. So let's huddle up again. What I'm going to do today, or at least for the majority of the episode, not the entire episode, I got a news story or two I really want to cover, but these are spit takes. A lot of theoretical questions or questions regarding this upcoming season that I kind of just want to cover quickly. I don't want to take like a whole 10-minute segment to go over them, but I do want to go over them more short, a little less research put into it, but more general questions that you don't really need to research a bunch on, although there will be a lot of stats coming in through this. So the first question is going to be, who will perform better this upcoming season? O.J. Howard or Rob Gronkowski? A very interesting question. O.J. Howard, the Buccaneer vet, will be facing some new challenges as he looks to outshine Gronk for the number one spot this upcoming season. Although I do believe that whoever falls to that second tight end spot will get the same, if not almost the same amount of snaps due to the talent in the tight end department. And I firmly believe that Arians is going to find ways to use more two tight end, two wide receiver sets and formations simply due to the amount of talent the Bucs have at tight end. So overall, considering this, the question shifts then from who's going to get the starting job to who simply is going to have the better stat line at the end of the 2020 season. Because I think either way they're going to have a pretty similar amount of snaps. O.J. Howard has never broken 600 receiving yards. He's only been with the Bucs for 3 seasons. He's only been in the NFL for 3 seasons, and he's never broken 7 touchdowns either. Howard has seemingly declined in production after looking at his stats throughout his career rather than improved, which is a bad sign for this upcoming season. But it's not a drastic decline or a drastic improvement. He's been pretty solid right around that 500, 600 yard mark. But the looming reason as to why I'm talking about the Bucs so much this offseason is Tom Brady. And on that note, can Tom Brady help Howard to reach that next level? Brady has been historically good at using tight end talent well when he has it, so I'm figuring that having 2 solid, possibly top tight end targets will pay off big time. We could see it turn out where Howard and Gronk are both top 15 in terms of tight end receiving production. That's a very, very real possibility. The last time Brady had 2 solid tight end threats was in 2016, when Gronk and Martellus Bennett combined for over 1,200 total receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. And something to take into account, even with those 1,200 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns, Gronk didn't even play half the season. He still only started in 6 games and only played in 8. And looking just at that 8-game stretch, when you average out the totals of the two players for a what would have been scenario, seeing as maybe what if Gronk played those full 16 games, the two tight ends combined for a whopping 1,800 receiving yards going off those averages. Now, if you flip the table, it's the same thing this year, but with 100% healthy Gronk after a full year of rest following year after year of injuries. And that's a really important thing because we really haven't seen injury-free Gronk since early 2016. It's been a while since we've seen a healthy Gronk, and I'm talking 100% health. Not just 6 months since his last injury. I'm talking a good long break without injury to really recoup and get his body back into shape. And along with this, we have Tom Brady on an offense that will allow him to have nearly full control for the first time in his career. And finally, a 3-year NFL starting tight end instead of Martellus Bennett. So in my eyes, it's a recipe for an insane tight end duo. And again, that comparison to Martellus Bennett, O.J. Howard already knows the system. He already knows the playbook. He already knows everything that you need to know to play with the Buccaneers. He's done it for 3 years. So considering Gronk has the experience edge over O.J. Howard and the overall talent edge over O.J. Howard, O.J. Howard has the familiarity edge over Gronk in terms of the Buccaneers' play style, their offensive strategy, and just their playbook overall. So in my eyes, like I said, it's a recipe for an insane tight end duo. And in the end, the player I see performing best out of these two is Gronk, simply due to overall skill, but a big part of it is chemistry. You see, I don't know many players that would come out of retirement just to catch passes from a certain quarterback outside of Gronk. Gronk didn't come out of retirement because he simply wanted to play. He came out of retirement because he wanted to play for Tom Brady. That's why he was like, hey, trade me to the Bucs. And the Patriots traded him to the Bucs because they knew Gronk wasn't going to play for them. And the Patriots got something out of it, which is good. You know, they got, I think it was, a second-round pick, I'm pretty sure. A second or a third-round pick they got out of that trade, which is pretty good considering they got pretty much a free second-round pick out of a player that never would have come out of retirement if the Patriots didn't agree to trade him. So back to that chemistry bit. Gronk and Brady have been playing together for a long, long time, ever since Gronk entered the league. So that chemistry has been built up great. Out of all the receiving targets on the Buccaneers, Gronk has an immediate edge over the rest in terms of getting the ball, getting targets from Brady just out of that familiarity between the two. Brady knows Gronk's play style. Gronk knows Brady. Gronk knows exactly what Brady wants from you. The other receivers kind of have to adjust to that kind of military attitude mid-game that they haven't really been used to under Jameis Winston. So I think Gronk is going to have an edge there. And once you add that to Gronk's overall skill, if he can even be, half of what he was in his prime, I say Gronk outdoes O.J. Howard this upcoming season. So the second question here is going to be, will Joe Burrow be a bust? An interesting question because there have been a lot of times in history, Johnny Manziel, Ryan Leaf, you look through history, Jamarcus Russell, all these players that were insanely hyped up and ended up being next to nothing in terms of NFL production. So the Cincinnati Bengals haven't won a playoff game since the early 90s, and yet many Bengals fans remain hopeful that the addition of a single quarterback will change that history, and you can't blame them. They haven't had a solid playoff run for over 2 decades, so you can't really blame them for really just grabbing onto any inch of hope they can find. And now that Andy Dalton's gone, they need a quarterback. Andy Dalton wasn't doing it for them in the first place. He wasn't taking that team to the next level, and they're really hoping that Joe Burrow can do that, and you can't really blame them for it. They're a hopeful fan base and organization. They've been hanging in there. They deserve to see some success out of this team. Because you look at this team, they've made the playoffs 7 times within the last 16 years under Marvin Lewis. They made the playoffs 7 times. They lost all those playoff appearances, one and done each time. 0-7 playoff record in the last 16 years. So they deserve a quarterback and get them past that first round. Now, the last time the Bengals chose a quarterback with a first-round selection was in 2003, in which the Bengals chose to pick Carson Palmer. So clearly the problem with the Bengals doesn't seem to be quarterback draft busts. Because in order to really determine whether Joe Burrow is going to be a bust, we need to figure out what the problem within the Bengals organization is. What's holding them back from making a legit playoff run? And clearly, considering Carson Palmer is their only first-round quarterback pick within the last 16 years, they don't seem to have a big problem with quarterback draft busts. Early quarterback draft busts, that is. And their only second round, I think, quarterback pick was Andy Dalton, who ended up being a solid starter for a while. So again, clearly the problem with the Bengals is not quarterback draft busts. So after that, you got to look towards the coaching department. And if that stands as the blockade between the Bengals and a championship, you see, Marvin Lewis held the coaching job for a staggering 16 years, despite only having just over an 500 overall record. Fairly enough, though, Lewis led the Bengals to 7 playoff berths. The flip side of that stat, again, is when you remember that the Bengals lost all 7 of those playoff berths, causing Lewis to have an 0-7 playoff record as the Bengals head coach. I don't know how he was head coach for that long, but he was. So, 2 things are brand new for the Bengals. They chose a first-round quarterback for the first time since 2003, and they have a new head coach for the first time since 2003. They hired him last year, but you get the gist. He's pretty fresh considering they only had one head coach in the 16 years before that. So maybe, just maybe, this could be a recipe for success. They haven't seen this in a while. But, last time they saw this, kind of a repeat in which they hired a new head coach and drafted a first-round quarterback right around the same time, the Bengals only made the playoffs once in the 6 years following those blockbuster moves. The next time the Bengals had a major switch at quarterback was when Andy Dalton was thrown into the starting role, and impressively, that resulted in 5 straight playoff appearances. Sadly, though, that also resulted in 5 straight wild card playoff losses. 5 straight years, 5 straight one-and-dones. I don't know how I could survive as a Bengals fan making the playoffs 5 years in a row and losing the wild card round 5 years in a row. But, props to you guys. You're really hanging in there. Clearly, despite what the Bengals have done, history has not been on their side. So, could a switch at head coach and a quarterback change this? Could a quarterback change make this all the better? And considering you're doing the head coach change too, is it going to make things better? So let's look first. Who is Zach Taylor? Is he a good coach? He's had a long coaching history, but not an extremely impressive one. He's never been a head coach of an NFL team or even an offensive or defensive coordinator if you exclude one season as the interim offensive coordinator for the 6-10 Miami Dolphins of 2015. Now, he's had stints with both the Dolphins as well as the Rams as a quarterback coach, and this may be the most important factor as to why the Bengals hired Taylor, maybe to develop the next man up, which is Joe Burrow, and granted they didn't know they were drafting Joe in 2019, but I'm sure the map of the future had been laid out for Taylor to succeed with a young quarterback prospect. So, off of that, Zach Taylor might not have been the answer in the head coaching department. He's only been with the team a year. He didn't really have a solid team. Didn't draft a new young quarterback last year. So you got to give him another year or two to really see if he's the man. So now let's look to Joe Burrow. Is Joe Burrow going to be a problem or is he going to be a solution? Burrow was a projected 6th round pick before the 2019 college season, in which Burrow led LSU to a national championship. One thing we have to remember is that Burrow was surrounded by solid talent at LSU. I'm not saying this to downplay Burrow, but I just want you to keep that in mind when you compare LSU to the Bengals. In the 2018 season, in which LSU finished with a 10-3 record, Burrow was aided by a solid defense led by Grant Telpett, Devin White, and Greedy Williams, and offensively the team feasted on a strong run game with 29 total rushing touchdowns compared to only 17 passing touchdowns. Don't get mad at me yet. Just keep listening. I'll get to the 2019 season. Don't worry. Joe Burrow played solid with a sub-60 completion percentage, 16 touchdowns to 5 picks. Not bad. It was his first year with LSU. Joe Burrow was also aided by wide receivers Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, who went on to be a first-round pick for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the following season, after Joe Burrow kind of got comfortable with LSU with Coach O, he gets comfortable there, and the next year, Joe Burrow's impact and really just his role with the team improved. and LSU dominated in return. A correlation that cannot simply be a coincidence. LSU began the year ranked 6th in the preseason AP poll and were projected to finish in 2nd in the SEC West behind Alabama. The Tigers secured an undefeated regular season that included wins over top 10 ranked teams Texas, Florida, Auburn, and Alabama. In the SEC championship game, LSU defeated Georgia to win their first conference title since 11. LSU was ranked number 1 in the final college football playoff rankings of the season, earning them a spot in the national semifinal game to be played at the Peach Bowl. They dominated 4th-ranked Oklahoma in that game, 63-28, to advance to the CFP championship game, and there they defeated the defending national champions Clemson 42-25 to secure LSU's 4th claimed national title in school history. The 2nd undefeated champion in the CFP era, and the 2nd 15-0 undefeated season among any team in the modern era, pointing to their dominant performance against a historically difficult schedule. Many have called the team the greatest in college football history. Again, that dominant performance against a historically difficult schedule. And who was the quarterback? Joe Burrow. The greatest team in college football history. And Joe Burrow won the Heisman while doing it by the largest margin in history of the Heisman Award. He also set the passing touchdown record with 60 and the highest passer rating with a rating of 202.0. Seemingly, Joe Burrow and bust are two terms that cannot be put together. If there was any quarterback in NFL history to put your money on, despite the fact that it was only really 1 year of stardom, it has to be Joe Burrow. Following the 2019 season, again, despite any season beforehand, Joe Burrow set himself up as a diamond prospect that simply cannot be ignored. Joe Burrow will, like I said earlier, he's going to face a tough challenge adapting to a bad O-line and following having the best O-line in college football, as well as overall a young team accustomed to losing following a 2-14 season. That's going to be hard for Joe Burrow. And it's a fair question to ask whether or not Burrow can stand up to the greatest challenge of his career. But no matter what happens, no one can blame the Bengals for drafting him number 1 overall. And frankly, I don't think they'll ever come close to regretting it. Again, if there was any quarterback as a general manager that you can take a number 1 pick and say, I don't see a single way that this backfires, it's Joe Burrow. The third question here that I'm going to look into answering is how well will Daniel Jones perform in 2020? To answer this one, let's first look at his 2019 stat line. Daniel Jones only played in 13 games last year, averaging 232 passing yards per game that totaled out 3,027 yards total last season. Along with this, Jones threw 24 touchdowns against 12 interceptions. He had a 61.9 completion percentage overall, along with 279 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. So, now that we have a solid understanding of how well Jones generally played last season, let's now look at how the team has improved from last season. The Giants bolstered their O-line with a first-round offensive tackle, along with a free agent offensive tackle addition in Cameron Fleming. The Giants also improved defensively, adding James Bradbury to improve the secondary and Blake Martinez to bolster the linebacking core, who was great in Wisconsin with the Packers. Green Bay Packers. And Jones didn't gain any big-name receiving threats in the offseason, but the Giants still have some fun offensive weapons to play with. They got Evan Engram, who racked up over 400 yards last year, Golden Tate, who racked up over 600, Sterling Shepard, who had just under 600, Darius Slayton, who led the team with 740, and Saquon Barkley, who hauled in over 400 receiving yards last season, and we all know what he's capable of on the ground. Now, the Giants easily have the ability to turn into an at least top 10 offense in the NFL as they build their O-line up and focus fire on Saquon Barkley in the run game. And to summarize what Jones needs to do differently, he needs to focus on ball security not only through the air, but on the ground as well. A part of this is growing more accustomed to the pocket and reading the pressure more quickly and more often on pre-snap. As his pre-snap reads on defenses improve, he'll be able to anticipate where the pressure is coming from and where his quickest options will be through the air. It's really just ball security and faster reads from Daniel Jones outside of that. And if Daniel Jones can do those things successfully, then I truly believe he will have a solid 2020 season. Somewhere around 3,500 yards and 30 touchdowns, assuming Saquon Barkley stays healthy through the 2020, which is not a sure thing. And overall, if I had to put my money on it, I'd say Jones will continue to develop along with the Giants roster, ultimately leading to a 7th or 6th seed playoff berth in 2021 or 2022. Now, the fourth question I'm going to answer today, and one that I'm really excited to answer, it's more of a theoretical, but it's very much a possibility this season, is which team would win the Super Bowl in a Patriots versus Buccaneers scenario. Now, it's an unlikely scenario, but considering the fact that I see the Patriots holding the 6th seed in the AFC and the Bucs holding the 3rd seed in the NFC, I figured this would be an interesting topic. Out of all possible Super Bowl matchups, this one seems to be the most dramatic for one, and quite honestly, the most exciting. Both Bill and Brady have a reason to be pissed off with something to prove in 2020, which would lead to an insane bout between the two minds that built the greatest dynasty in the history of football. In this Super Bowl matchup, though, Bill would have an immediate edge over Brady, and this is due to the fact that Bill knows Tom Brady's weak points, and Tom Brady is well aware that Bill can spice things up a bit to trick him, basically meaning Bill has a .10 over Brady because Bill knows where Brady performs the worst, but Brady doesn't have that kind of edge on Bill. Bill is historically known to adjusting the game plan week by week from heavy run offense to air raid offense, simply depending on the team he's playing. And this will be what makes it hard for Brady to have any knowledge pre-matchup on what the Patriots would show him defensively in that game. So the question then shifts to who will be the better team in terms of overall skill, which is a competition easily won by the Bucs, which kind of makes it 1-1 here if we're rating this like a scoreboard. The Bucs are rated by some as having the best receiving targets in the NFL, the group including Rob Gronkowski, O.J. Howard, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and LaShawn McCoy to give the big namers. And in terms of offensive production, I think it's fair to predict that the Bucs will have the upper hand. Defensively, though, which gives the Patriots another point, I'd have to give the upper hand to the Patriots. Granted, the Patriots lost some key defensive players in Danny Shelton, Kyle Van Noy, Jamie Collins, not to mention the opt-outs in Hightower and Chung. It's 2-2. Two key starters on the Patriots offense, and overall the Patriots have lost 5 defensive starters, which is tough. So again, now the score is 2-2. So although where the Patriots particularly dominated defensively last year, which helped them to dominate through the first half of the season when they played young quarterbacks like, say, Daniel Jones, Sam Darnold, and Josh Allen, was the Patriots' secondary. And lucky for them, they didn't lose a single crucial piece of that secondary outside of Patrick Chung, who could be replaced by Patriots' second-round pick Kyle Duggar. Devin and Jason McCourty, Stephon Gilmore, and the severely underrated Jonathan Jones still exist to shut down opposing passing offenses. So, 3-2 Patriots. Now, due to this, a Super Bowl matchup between the Bucs, who will dominate in the pass game, and the Patriots, who will dominate in the passing defense, would be a perfect test of talents. But overall, I know I have the Patriots up 3-2 right now, but you'll understand in a second, the Bucs would likely win the game. Tom Brady practiced against this exact secondary for the entirety of last season outside of Kyle Duggar, so he knows where not to throw the ball. And at the same time, he might just know a thing or two about where to throw it and what matchups to throw at the Patriots. Now, the Bucs would also focus on the run game and using halfback screens often throughout the game as the Patriots struggled against the run last season. Not to mention, they lost 3 linebackers and a key defensive tackle in Danny Shelton. So, not to mention how many blitz packages Belichick would throw at Brady, considering this is the greatest weakness Brady has. So, they would be able to counter that with the halfback screen. and a combination of a heavy weaponized offense under the control of an extremely careful Tom Brady, considering how familiar he is with the dominance of the Patriots secondary, along with a focus on the ground game. That's 2 points. Brady's familiarity with the secondary and the ground game against the Patriots' very lackluster linebacking core and their loss of a key starting defensive tackle puts the Bucs up 4-3. I believe would simply be too much for the Patriots defense to handle. I think the defense would manage, but I think that when it came down to it, when it's a game-winning drive, I don't know if the Patriots defense would be able to hold. The game would be defined by the battle between a Bucs passing offense and the Pats passing defense, and a battle I believe Tom Brady is more likely to win. It's just, and again, the Patriots secondary struggled last year at points. They struggled against those air raid offense teams. They struggled against the Chiefs. They hemmed the Chiefs in pretty well in the first half last season when they played the Chiefs. But once you got into the second half, it just turned into really, the floodgates opened up and the Chiefs started scoring. So overall, I think that Tom Brady and that star-studded offense might be a bit too much for that secondary to handle. Just going off of what happened last year. Now, I'm willing to give Belichick an edge in terms of how clever he can be and how well he can throw off this Buccaneers team. It's going to be very, very hard for the Buccaneers to prepare for what they're going up against. Really, all the Buccaneers are going to be able to do is try to master their game plan, because I think it's going to be very hard for them to try and counter the Patriots' defensive play or even their offensive play, just because we all know Bill Belichick is a master at changing up that game plan from run heavy, pass heavy. He can turn into an air raid offense. He can turn into a dink and dunk offense at any point in the season. I mean, you look at if I look back here, you look at when the Patriots won the Super Bowl against the Rams, the 13-3. You look at that playoff run, they changed offensively every single week. They go up against the Chargers, right? And everybody's expecting the Chargers to win because the Chargers have the better offense, for one, and they have the great defense. So everyone's saying, geez, Patriots are going to get smoked. And the Patriots were up 35-7 at halftime. At halftime, because you watch that game, the Patriots shifted to something that we hadn't seen from them all year. Dinking and dunking. 5-yard pass, 6-yard pass, 4-yard run, 8-yard pass. It was like a machine up the field. No long plays, just all these medium plays, and they dominated against the Chargers. Again, up 35-7 at the half. And they completely shut down Rivers outside of one long touchdown pass early on. So a game like that, and then the next week against the Chiefs, it just turns into a total shootout in which the Patriots won. Their offense looks stellar that week. And then you go to the next week, the Patriots defense just turns on. After the Patriots defense got absolutely burnt against the Chiefs, they go up against arguably the best offense of the year that year and shut them down to 3 points. I mean, it really just goes to show that when I'm looking at a matchup like this, it's so hard for me to say for sure who would win, because no matter what, you never know what Belichick is going to be able to do offensively or defensively. He is going to change up that game plan to attack the other team's weaknesses. He's going to do it. He did it against the Rams. He did it against the Chiefs, and he did it against the Chargers. Those 3 games in a row. It's the perfect 3 games to watch if you really want to understand how great of a coach Bill Belichick is and just how dominant he is when he uses a little cleverness to get in there. So when you look at a matchup between the Patriots and the Bucs, you also have to look at that. You know, what if Belichick just absolutely shuts down the Bucs offense? Could he do that? Is that a possibility? Really, the only offense, or one of the only offenses that we've seen in recent years that Belichick has really seemed to not have an answer for, despite playing several times in several years in a row, are the Chiefs and Andy Reid. Andy Reid has historically been able to outsmart Belichick offensively in terms of being able to beat Belichick's defense, but Andy Reid has had an equally strugglesome time trying to slow down the Patriots offense when they face him. So yeah, in that sense, it's tough. Can the Bucs outsmart Bill Belichick there? My bad. Can they outsmart Bill Belichick there? It's a tough question. Um, and the only reason I'm giving the Bucs the win here is simply out of roster skill. And I know it's so ignorant to do that after what I just said, but if I had to put my money on it, I gotta put my money on Brady. I gotta put my money on the Bucs. Brady's been able to pull off miracles before, and I think that in this scenario, if I had to put my money down, I'm calling Brady to pull off one more miracle. One more miracle to prove to the world that he was more important to the Patriots dynasty than Bill Belichick was, which I think is a very important question that I'm actually going to look into for next episode. Check in for next episode, a good way to end here. Check in for next episode to hear my take on who was more important to the Patriots dynasty, Tom Brady or Bill Belichick. So, I'll end it on that. Thank you so much for watching. I could talk about the Super Bowl matchup for hours, but I'll end it here. Thank you so much for watching or listening or wherever you are. And yeah, I already went through the Instagram page. If you're still here, again, check out the Instagram page at Fifth Down Huddle. Check out the YouTube at Fifth Down Huddle. Everything at Fifth Down Huddle. Just know that on YouTube, I post some separate videos that aren't in the podcast, like fantasy advice. And on Instagram, I post, daily open questions, NFL news, fantasy advice, fantasy predictions, team predictions, just things like that. So if you want to be a part of the podcast, if you want to drop questions, go DM me on Instagram, send me a message, comment down below on YouTube what you want to hear me talk about. But for next week, the only thing I know for sure that I'm going to talk about is the Patriots dynasty and who is more important, Tom Brady or Bill Belichick. So check back next week for that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you then.